You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Hello, I'm Steven Willis, host of the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. He is Michael Katz from the Northeast Mississippi Tupelo Daily Journal. And I just want to let everybody know today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Michael, SEC play is finally here. Preseason is over. And that kind of leads me to the question is, what are the things that you're going to be most paying attention to on Saturday morning?
Yeah, it's interesting because as good as Ole Miss has looked against lesser competition, let's call it, I still feel like there's a few things that, or maybe more than a few things that we don't necessarily know. I think the big one for me is how good is this offensive line? And I think we are going to learn that quite quickly against Kentucky because Kentucky has one of the best defensive linemen in the country. And Deion Walker, he is like 6'6", 340 pounds. He is a monster. They are always very good on the defensive front. It's been a Mark Stoops staple. The numbers aren't, they're fine for Ole Miss's offensive line. Their sack numbers are right about in the middle nationally. But again, a lot of moving parts. There's been some guys we haven't seen yet. And again, trying to figure out which rotations work best. I understand it was always sort of going to be a work in progress. But I think we are going to learn how good this line is. And by extension, I think how good this team can be, because I think so much of how good this team is capable of being is hinges on how good that offensive front is. We know how good the skill positions are. We know how good Jaxson Dart is. We know how good the defensive line is. I think that we're going to learn a lot about the potential of this team, specifically on the offensive line this weekend.
Yeah, and the injury report that came out on Wednesday, Lane Kiffin put like 25 names on it, which is kind of hilarious. But there was no Caleb Warren on it, I don't believe.
Correct. I believe that's right. I know Jeremy James is one of the outs. I believe.
Yes, he has the broken hand.
Yeah. I think Jaquan Scott was listed as probable.
Yeah, I'm under the impression that anybody that's listed as probable is going to play.
Yeah, that when I saw that, I mean, I knew what the list was going to look like. You knew it was just going to be a billion people with probables and questionables. So that kind of turned out the way I thought it would. But yeah, I don't believe I saw Caleb Warren on there. You're correct.
Yeah, so that means that when you're playing the best defensive line that you have seen this season and potentially the second best defensive line that you are going to see this season, you have Caleb Warren, you have Jaquan Scott that's probably going to be available.
Caleb Warren was probable.
He was probable. Okay.
Yep.
So him and Jaquan Scott and those guys, you probably think that Ole Miss is going to be as close to their first choice offensive line minus Jeremy James as they could be at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, so much of what we've seen the last couple of weeks is sort of mixing and matching and trying to figure out what combinations work. But, we haven't probably seen the best combination yet. And maybe that's, I think that there's a chance that Ole Miss fans are probably happy with what it actually ends up looking like, because I don't think we've seen the best version of this line quite yet due to the injuries and whatnot. But I mean, this is probably, other than Jeremy James, this is probably the best version, like you said, of what this line is going to look like. And if it doesn't look great this week, it's no shame in not looking great against Kentucky, but I think this is a big week for them regardless.
Yeah, I think the goal in this game needs to just be getting the win. I know everybody in the fan base after the last 4 weeks, they're wanting to play the style points game, and anything that's wrong, they're looking to nitpick every little thing that's going because they need something to look. They're not where they need to be. That's the natural state of a fan. But this Kentucky game is just survive and advance. It's win. Because Kentucky against Georgia, all that's going to say at the end of the year is that you beat Kentucky, not that you beat Kentucky 13-12 like Georgia did. It's not a situation where I don't think that Ole Miss needs a 40-10 type game for this to be a successful Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, would you like the huge style points win? Of course, but like Mark Stoops' teams always play Lane Kiffin close. I mean, the two games that they've played, one was a 1-point game and one was a 3-point game. The last one with the Levis fumble. They have good matchups. That's what it is. Mark Stoops tends to play good teams really, really well. I know part of it is maybe he doesn't always play well against some of the lesser teams on the schedule, but it always seems like he has his teams up for the big matchups on their schedule for the most part. So, yeah, I mean, a win's a win. And again, so much of the conversation has been, well, Ole Miss hasn't played anybody. Well, you know, listen, is this one of the better Kentucky teams Stoops has had? I don't know, probably not. I don't think their offense is there, and you know, compared to some of the better teams he's had. But at the same time, this is a really formidable team, just in terms of talent and what they do up front. So, you know, if Ole Miss wins this game, you know, are there still going to be questions? Yeah, because that's what people do. But I think any sort of win is obviously you want to stay undefeated, but I think it's a chance to, you know, kind of silence the doubters.
Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. When we come back, we'll talk about the likely number one pressure point in this game for Ole Miss to have to exploit if they are going to be successful. Stick around for that. We'll let you know what it is. With Robinhood Gold, you do not need a silver spoon to eat up financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5 APY on uninvested cash, receive unlimited 1% deposit bonuses, and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost in an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of high net worth people for any net worth people. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. They're the new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up for Robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product specific disclosures, visit Robinhood.com/gold. Investing does involve risk. Rates may change, and gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold LLC. You know, I want to welcome a new partner to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast in College Corner. It's your one-stop stop for all things Ole Miss. You know, game day is just around the corner, just in a few hours. And this week, fans are going to be rocking either powder or red. It's a stripe out against Kentucky. So head on over to College Corner to pick up your perfect game day gear if you forgot the wrong thing to wear. They open up at 8:30 in the morning, so you'll be able to check them out nice and early. And Scott just got a bunch of new Realtree Galaxy tumblers and more stuff that is on the way as well. So whether you're getting up for football, basketball, or baseball, College Corner has got you covered. They're located off of Sisk Avenue, right across from the new Chick-fil-A, and getting to the store is a breeze, and they have plenty of parking. For those of you out of state, no worries. Visit collegecornerstore.com, where they turn around orders lightning fast. Trust me, this just isn't a pitch. College Corner is where I get all of my Rebel gear. So visit collegecornerstore.com or stop by the College Corner today. So, Michael, it's interesting because South Carolina completely wrecked this Kentucky team a couple of weeks back. And they did that because their defensive line just completely worked over the offensive line. Kentucky could not protect. It just made Brock Vandagriff's life very miserable, and it forced Kentucky into situations they just didn't want to be in. Now, in my opinion, I think 3 of the 4 players on the defensive line likely would start at South Carolina if Ole Miss players went over there. So there's more talent on the field. Now, I granted, Kentucky can clean some stuff up. They can do some stuff a little bit differently, change their protections up. But I think the pressure point in this game, it's going to be the Ole Miss defensive line versus the Kentucky offensive line, right?
Yeah, it's weird because I feel like we talk about Kentucky's offensive line every time Ole Miss plays and how it's sort of a weaker point, and it's kind of surprising because of how good they are on the defensive line. It seems like they have had some issues in protection these last few years. Again, their sack number, I think they've given up 10 sacks or something, and I understand they've already played 2 SEC games, so when you play South Carolina and Georgia, those numbers are going to look different than some of the teams who haven't necessarily play that level of competition yet. But Ole Miss's defensive line is as good as anybody's really out there, if you ask most people. So I think it's an opportunity to rush Vandegrift. Vandegrift's been a little bit up and down. His numbers are, not great. I know he was a really highly touted guy coming out of high school. You don't end up at Georgia otherwise, but this feels like the kind of game where if Princely Monmielen and Walter Nolan and Jared Ivey, assuming he plays, and Pig East can, wreak havoc like they have been doing, it's going to be a really, really long day for that offense.
If you look at this thing right here, it shows how explosive Ole Miss's offense has been through the 2024 season. And Pete Golding is known as a guy that has been able to get defensive ends explosive plays, going all the way back to Marcus Davenport. But until the Georgia Southern game, it was mainly tackles for loss and not sacks. So this isn't an explosive defense that is built off of sacks as far as their explosive plays. It's just hard to run on this team. And there's players like Chris Paul and Santarin Perkins and Kari Coleman and TJ Daugherty, they're doing some work behind the line of scrimmage. I think Zach Arnett deserves a ton of credit because they've added the way, like Mississippi State's linebackers over the past few years have been really good. I think his ability to coach linebackers and scheme to them with what Pete Golding does on the defensive end, I think that's a little bit of a secret sauce on this year's defense.
Yeah, I mean, Chris Paul is like one of the highest rated defensive players in college football right now. I think I saw the graphic. There was like him and Jared Ivey are two of like the top PFF rated guys right now. I also think it's important that, like, I know that we always look at sacks as being like the indicator of how good a pass rush or a pressure is, but Princely Monmielen I think has like 15 pressures already, which is like top 10 nationally. So like even when they aren't making, getting sacks or maybe getting like the high profile stat, they're still causing havoc, and I think that's so huge. Again, as uncomfortable as you can make things for opposing offenses, I think that's why this Ole Miss defensive line has a chance to be so good and has been so good.
Yeah, if you just look at what they've done this season, this is their red zone numbers. They've given up 13% red zone touchdowns. That's 1 out of 8. If you get into the red zone, which people have gotten into the red zone 8 times, you've only scored 4 of them. That's 1 out of 2 times. You do not score when you get inside the 25-yard line. And to me, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, no, and again, I know there's like the whole like bend but don't break philosophy of things, but for the most part, this team has shut teams down. But when teams, like you said, do get past midfield and into scoring range, they've just taken it to another level. It's like as good as that defensive front looks most of the time, it just seems like they are crashing even harder in those situations. I mean, again, how many times have we seen field goals have to be settled for in those situations? So, I think there is something to be said for playing your best in the biggest moments. And, so far they have been about as good as you could ask in those situations.
Next on Locked On Ole Miss, we're putting the finishing touches on this weekend showdown between the Rebels and the Wildcats with Michael. Plus, we'll get predictions and things we're looking for and expecting and all of that good stuff. So stick around for that. But hey, NFL fans, you can start this season with a big return on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. It is the place to bet which side of Ole Miss being minus 17.5 over the Kentucky Wildcats for Saturday's game, or perhaps maybe you want to think about the over-under, which is currently at 53.5 points. And Ole Miss would have easily hit that over number through most of their games this season. So the over feels like it might be a play, but you also have this hunch that Kentucky's offense has struggled And maybe that could concern you with that number being so low if they're going to be able to score enough points to hit that over-under number. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game like that, you can check out the latest stats, view play-by-play, so much more on the same page where you place the bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. All right, Michael, we need some final thoughts here. So what's the questions that are going to be answered after this Kentucky game? We're going to actually know definitively what Ole Miss has.
Well, like we talked about earlier, I think we're going to know what this offensive line is and how good it can be. It might not be the best version of itself in terms of quality of play this weekend because you're going to probably have some guys who haven't played this year playing for the first time, so there might be some rust. But I think you are going to have an idea of the potential of that group after this weekend, and I think that's really, really big. I also think that we are maybe going to learn a little bit about how – listen, Jaxson Dart has been off to this incredible start. I mean, the stats are just absolutely bonkers right now with the passing yards through 4 games, the completion percentage, the total offense, the efficiency. I
saw your story on it. Just the Daily Journal.
Yeah, just every stat. I mean, again, I know that Joe Burrow played some different teams in his first 4 games, but when you can surpass Joe Burrow in passing yards through the first 4 games of a season, that's something pretty incredible.
Okay, that is true. Joe Burrow did play some different teams, but after the Kentucky game, the first 5 games are going to, I think, be fairly synonymous.
Yes. And so I think that we are going to learn about not how good Jaxson Dart is, because I think we know that Jaxson Dart is really good, but just sort of the level of play that he and this offense can be at, because this is really the first defensive tests that they are going to see. We've seen Jaxson throwing to pretty wide open receivers for the most part. Juice Wells has been open by like 15 yards on most of his touchdowns. There hasn't been a lot of contested moments. And when there have been, Ole Miss wins them because they are going to out-athlete everyone on the first 4 games of that schedule. But I think now we're getting to a point where it's not going to be as simple as having guys wide open. I think we're going to learn about Jackson's decision making. I think we're going to learn about that deep ball accuracy. I think we're going to learn about just how he handles pressure, because again, he's had some fairly clean pockets this year. What happens when things get a little muddy? Is he still keeping his eyes downfield? Is he taking off and running? Is he making the big mistake like he did his first year? Or is he keeping the ball out of harm's way like he did last year? What does it look like when the bullets really start flying? I think it's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, and Mark Stoops has made a living in college football of being able to win plays and trick quarterbacks. So if Jaxson Dart performs well against Kentucky, I think we know exactly Jaxson Dart's ceiling at that point if he plays well as New York, honestly.
Absolutely. No, I agree. I think is this the best team Ole Miss is going to play? No, but I think that defensively and scheme-wise, this is going to be this is going to be a really, really good test. Again, if Jaxson lights it up, I don't think there's any more questions about who they've played.
Yeah, and it should be very interesting. Like I said, that South Carolina game, everybody just looks at the scores. Like South Carolina beat Kentucky 31-3. But whenever you look into that box score, that was a weird football game. South Carolina only had 200 yards of offense and 13 first downs and somehow got into the end zone 3 times.
Yeah. There's been a lot of abnormal college football games at that stadium, as we've seen over the years. So
it should be pretty interesting indeed. Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first and listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Michael Katz is from the Northeast Mississippi Tupelo Daily Journal. What do you got going on this week, bud?
You alluded to it earlier, but I had wrote a story about Jaxson Dart's first 4 games and how it compares to the SEC's leading passers since 2005, because as you might be aware, the stat that's been going around is that Jaxson Dart has the most passing yards in SEC of any SEC quarterback through the first 4 games last 20 years. So It was quite a trip through memory lane, looking up, Andre Woodson and Tyler Wilson and Dylan Thompson and just these names I haven't really heard a lot about and kind of forgot about, and just sort of comparing what they did in their first 4 games, who they played, to what Jaxson has done. It's just I think what we have seen so far is really, really it's really impressive. I don't think it really matters who you play. And when you look at who some of these other guys played, it's not like they were all playing world beaters their first 4. So for Jaxson to have the numbers that he's had is really impressive. And I think that putting it into historical context really brings that point home.
And it turned out being like the most since Tim Couch in like 98, right?
Yeah, so I tried to go back on College Football Reference, but they don't go past like 2003 for game logs of individual guys. So I think because I was like, maybe it's like a Danny Werfel or like you said, Tim Couch, because he had that insane year. I tried to look up a Kentucky box score, and I did not have any luck. So I know I've been pretty good with the archives lately, so I guess I got to find somebody in Kentucky.
Yeah, everybody needs to check out that story by Michael, because that's some pretty good stuff. I'm a football history nerd, so I love stuff like that. Anyway, Michael, thank you very much. Be safe heading over to the game on Saturday, and we'll talk to you next week, buddy.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you.